the Nameless Way, Tao. At the foundation of Chinese philosophical thought stands a concept so elusive yet so fundamental that its very first description begins with a paradox. The Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. With those enigmatic words, the Tao Te Ching, Tao Te Ching, introduces us to perhaps the most influential and yet least definable concept in all of Eastern philosophy, the Tao, or Way, that simultaneously transcends all description while manifesting as the generative principle behind all existence. The Chinese character for Tao, Tao, combines elements suggesting both head and going, conveying the sense of a path or way forward. At its most literal level, Tao simply means road or path, but its philosophical significance extends far beyond this mundane definition to encompass the fundamental nature of reality itself, the underlying principle that gives rise to the universe and guides its transformations, the natural order that flows through all existence, the unnameable source from which all being emerges and to which all returns. Unlike Western philosophical and religious traditions that often begin with a creator separate from creation, Taoist thought recognizes no absolute distinction between the source and its manifestations. The Tao is neither a deity nor an abstract principle, entirely removed from the world, but the very process through which the world continually creates and transforms itself. As the Tao Te Ching expresses, the Tao produces the one produces the two produce the three, and the three produce the 10,000 things. This cosmological sequence describes not a historical creation event, but an ongoing process of differentiation, through which the undifferentiated Tao manifests as the multiplicity of existence. What distinguishes Taoist understanding from other philosophical approaches is its recognition that the Tao operates not through force or intervention, but through Wu-Wei, often translated as non-action, but more accurately understood as action that arises naturally, without striving or interference. As the Tao Te Ching observes, the Tao does nothing, yet nothing is left undone. This apparent paradox points to the distinction between forced action that works against natural patterns and effortless action that aligns with them, the difference between swimming against the current and flowing with it. This principle finds its clearest expression in nature. Water, frequently cited in Taoist texts as exemplifying the Tao's nature, demonstrates perfect Wu-Wei, flowing to the lowest places without striving, taking the shape of any container without resistance, yielding to obstacles yet gradually reshaping even the hardest stone through its gentle persistence. As Chapter 8 of the Tao Te Ching observes, the highest good is like water. Water benefits the 10,000 things without striving. It dwells in places that people disdain. Thus, it is close to the Tao. Unlike philosophical systems built on abstract reasoning or religious traditions based on divine revelation, Taoist understanding emerges primarily from careful observation of natural processes, the changing seasons, the growth and decay of living things, the interplay of opposing yet complementary forces. From this observation comes the recognition that the universe operates not through the imposition of external order, but through the spontaneous self-organization that emerges when things are allowed to follow their innate tendencies. The concept of Ziran, often translated as spontaneity or naturalness, expresses this quality of self-organization. The term literally means self-so, that which is naturally or spontaneously thus, without external direction or effort. As the Tao Te Ching states, humanity follows the earth follows the universe. The universe follows the Tao. The Tao follows what is natural. This sequence reveals how true alignment requires recognizing and cooperating with natural tendencies, rather than imposing artificial patterns based on conceptual understanding alone. Central to Taoist cosmology is the dynamic interplay between yin and yang, complementary interdependent forces whose continuous transformation creates the patterns we observe throughout existence. Originally representing the shaded yin and sunny yang sides of a mountain, these terms evolved to encompass all complementary pairs: dark, light, passive, active, receptive, creative, feminine, masculine, earth, heaven. Unlike Western dualistic thinking that often places such pairs in opposition or hierarchy, Taoist understanding recognizes their essential unity and mutual creation, each defined by and transformed into the other in an endless cycle of becoming. The Yi Jing, I Ching, or Book of Changes, systematize this understanding into a comprehensive model of transformation based on the interaction between yin and yang lines. Through its 64 hexagrams, each representing a specific configuration of these forces, the Yi Jing offers not just a divination system, but a profound philosophical framework for understanding how circumstances arise and transform through the dynamic balance of opposing yet complementary energies. What distinguishes the Taoist approach from many philosophical systems is its emphasis on the limitations of conceptual knowledge. The opening line of the Tao Te Ching doesn't merely state that the Tao is difficult to describe, but asserts that the very act of naming and conceptualizing fundamentally alters what is being described. As the text continues, the nameless is the beginning of heaven and earth. The named is the mother of the 10,000 things. This distinction between the named and nameless aspects of reality points to the recognition that our conceptual maps, while pragmatically useful, inevitably simplify and distort the territory they attempt to represent. This skepticism toward abstract knowledge extends to conventional distinctions between good and bad, beautiful and ugly, high and low. Chapter 2 of the Tao Te Ching observes, when people see some things as beautiful, other things become ugly. When people see some things as good, other things become bad. Such passages don't advocate moral relativism, but point to how conventional categorizations often obscure the underlying unity and interdependence of apparent opposites. The sage recognizes these distinctions as provisional rather than absolute, useful within specific contexts, but not reflecting any inherent division in reality itself. The political implications of Taoist philosophy prove particularly revolutionary within the context of ancient China, where Confucian emphasis on proper social hierarchy and active governance dominated mainstream thought. Against this prevailing view, the Tao Te Ching proposes governance based on minimal interference. Govern a great nation as you would cook a small fish. Don't overdo it. This approach trusts in the self-organizing capacity of natural and social systems when not distorted by excessive control or regulation. Chapter 17 elaborates. The best ruler is one whose existence is barely known by the people. The next best is one who is loved and praised. Next comes one who is feared. The worst is one who is despised. Where there is lack of trust, there will be lack of trust in return. The best ruler speaks rarely, and when the task is accomplished and things have been completed, all the people say, "We did it ourselves." This vision of leadership emphasizes creating conditions for natural flourishing, rather than imposing order through force or manipulation. A political philosophy based on Wu-Wei, rather than control. Unlike many philosophical and religious systems that emphasize transcending nature or conquering it, Taoist thought recognizes humans as integral participants in nature's processes, neither superior to nor separate from them. The path of wisdom lies not in asserting dominance over natural systems, but in recognizing our place within them and aligning our actions with their inherent patterns. As philosopher Alan Watts observed, the Tao that can be understood cannot be the primal or cosmic Tao, just as an idea that can be expressed in words cannot be the infinite idea. This humble recognition of human limitations contrasts sharply with philosophical traditions that place human reason at the center of understanding. Zhuangzi, Chuang-Tzu, the second great Taoist philosopher after Laozi, Lao Tzu, uses humor, paradox, and fantastical stories to challenge anthropocentric perspectives. In one famous passage, he writes, "How do I know that in loving life I am not just being deluded? How do I know that in fearing death I am not like a man who has abandoned his home as a youth and now doesn't know his own way back?" Such questions subvert the assumption that human values and categories represent absolute reality rather than limited perspectives. The Taoist vision finds particularly vivid expression in traditional Chinese landscape painting, where mountains and waters, the literal meaning of the Chinese term for landscape, shan shui, represent the dynamic interplay between stable and flowing principles. The paintings typically depict tiny human figures within vast natural scenes, not to diminish humanity, but to contextualize human existence within the greater patterns of nature. The generous use of empty space, liu bai, literally leave white, demonstrates the Taoist recognition that emptiness proves as essential as form, creating the context in which forms can appear and move. This aesthetic sensibility reflects the philosophical principle of xu, shu, translated variously as emptiness, void, or openness, the quality that allows things to function. A room's usefulness comes from its empty space, not its walls. A vessel's utility derives from its hollow interior, not its material form. As Chapter 11 of the Tao Te Ching observes, 30 spokes share the wheel's hub. It is the center hole that makes it useful. Shape clay into a vessel. It is the space within that makes it useful. Cut doors and windows for a room. It is the holes which make it useful. Therefore, profit comes from what is there, usefulness from what is not there. The practical implications of Taoist philosophy extend far beyond aesthetics and metaphysics into medicine, martial arts, governance, and daily life. Traditional Chinese medicine operates from the understanding that health represents the harmonious flow of vital energy, through the body's meridian system. Disease indicates blockage or imbalance in this flow, with treatment aimed not at battling symptoms, but at restoring the body's natural capacity for self-regulation and healing. Similarly, internal martial arts like Tai Chi, embody the principle of Wu-Wei by cultivating sensitivity and responsiveness rather than brute force. The practitioner learns to yield to incoming force rather than opposing it directly, to maintain centeredness amid movement, to redirect energy with minimal exertion. Through these arts, philosophical principles become embodied understanding rather than abstract concepts, wisdom integrated into the body's very movements. The Taoist perspective transforms how we understand wisdom itself. Unlike traditions that identify wisdom with accumulated knowledge or intellectual sophistication, Taoist thought recognizes wisdom as the capacity to perceive and align with the natural patterns that precede and transcend conceptual understanding. As the Tao Te Ching suggests, Knowing others is intelligence. Knowing yourself is true wisdom. Mastering others is strength. Mastering yourself is true power. This self-mastery involves not controlling or suppressing natural tendencies, but recognizing and working with them skillfully, like a farmer who understands soil, climate, and seed well enough to create conditions for optimal growth without forcing development. The Taoist sage achieves effectiveness by aligning with rather than opposing the inner nature of things, including human nature with its desires, emotions, and limitations. In an era of environmental crisis driven largely by the attempt to dominate and control natural systems, Taoist insights offer a particularly relevant corrective. Its vision of humans as participants in, rather than masters over nature. Its recognition of the self-organizing capacity of complex systems when not disrupted by excessive intervention, and its emphasis on working with rather than against natural patterns, all point toward a more sustainable relationship with the ecosystems that support human and non-human life. Contemporary physicist and systems theorist Fritjof Capra recognizes this relevance. The Chinese concept of order is not based on divine will or natural law, but on the spontaneous cooperation of all beings in the universe, brought about not by force, but by a natural consensus. This idea of spontaneous order is very close to what we now call self-organization in the sciences of complexity. As Taoist understanding has spread beyond China, it has influenced philosophical, scientific, and cultural developments worldwide. From ecological thinking to quantum physics, from minimalist aesthetics to non-linear approaches to systems theory, the ancient insights of Taoist philosophy continue to offer relevant perspectives on contemporary challenges. Its emphasis on balance, spontaneous order, contextual thinking, and the limitations of analytical knowledge provides an essential complement to dominant paradigms focused on control, linear causality, and reductionist analysis. As consciousness transitions toward sleep, consider how the principles of Tao manifest in your immediate experience. Notice how efforts to force sleep often create tension that prevents natural rest, while allowing sleep to arise spontaneously, neither grasping nor resisting, aligns with the effortless effectiveness of Wu-Wei. Observe how the nameless darkness that precedes dreams shares qualities with the undifferentiated Tao that precedes differentiation into distinct forms. Feel how the natural alternation between waking and sleeping exemplifies the complementary transformation of yang into yin that generates all patterns of existence. May this ancient wisdom illuminate your understanding, revealing through both waking and dreaming the nameless source that gives rise to all named things, the effortless action that accomplishes without striving, and the natural harmony that emerges when we align with rather than oppose the innate tendencies of existence itself, the mysterious generative process that Chinese philosophy calls Tao. The effortless action, Wu-Wei. Among the most paradoxical yet profound concepts in Chinese philosophy stands Wu-Wei. Wu-Wei, literally non-doing or non-action, but encompassing a far more sophisticated understanding than these simple translations suggest. Neither passive inaction nor strenuous effort, Wu-Wei represents action that arises spontaneously and effortlessly from perfect alignment with the natural flow of circumstances, a mode of engagement that achieves maximum effectiveness with minimum strain by working with rather than against the inherent tendencies of situations and beings. The Chinese term combines wu, without lacking not having, with wei, action, effort, striving, purpose, suggesting activity that lacks forcing, straining, or interfering with the natural course of events. Unlike both passive resignation and aggressive intervention, Wu-Wei embodies the paradoxical achievement of doing through non-doing, of accomplishing through non-striving, what philosopher Alan Watts described as the wisdom of letting go of one's own will in order to experience the working of a greater will that doesn't originate from one's egocentricity. This concept forms a cornerstone of Taoist philosophy, first articulated in the Tao Te Ching, attributed to Lao Tzu. As the text expresses in chapter 37, the Tao does nothing, yet nothing is left undone. This enigmatic statement points to how the generative principle behind all existence operates not through forceful intervention, but through allowing things to unfold according to their inherent nature. As chapter 48 further advises, in the pursuit of learning, every day something is acquired. In the pursuit of Tao, every day something is dropped. Less and less is done until non-action is achieved. When nothing is done, nothing is left undone. What distinguishes Wu-Wei from mere passivity is its dynamic, responsive quality. Rather than doing nothing, it involves acting in such perfect harmony with circumstances that action seems to arise of itself, without the sense of a separate doer forcing outcomes against resistance. The Taoist sage Zhuangzi, Chuang-Tzu, illustrates this quality through the story of Cook Ding, who carved oxen with such perfect attunement to their natural anatomy that his knife never dulled. When asked about his skill, Cook Ding explained, "What I care about is the way, Tao, which goes beyond skill. I follow the natural makeup, strike in the big hollows, guide the knife through the big openings, and follow things as they are. My skill has reached the point where my understanding, mind, goes where it wants, and not where it does not want to go." This story reveals the essence of Wu-Wei as perfect attunement rather than either forceful control or passive surrender. The skilled butcher neither imposes his will against the natural structure of the ox, nor abandons deliberate action altogether. Instead, he achieves such intimate familiarity with the inherent patterns of his subject that his movements flow spontaneously along the paths of least resistance, neither forcing nor yielding but harmonizing so completely that the distinction between actor and acted upon dissolves. The philosophical depth of Wu-Wei emerges through its integration of seemingly contradictory qualities. It is simultaneously active yet non-striving, deliberate yet spontaneous, disciplined yet effortless. Unlike Western philosophical frameworks that often separate these qualities into opposing categories, the Chinese understanding recognizes their complementarity, how the highest action transcends the very distinction between doing and non-doing through perfect attunement to circumstance. This attunement requires what contemporary psychologists might call embodied knowledge, understanding that resides not merely in abstract concepts, but in the body's direct, intuitive grasp of situations. As the Zhuangzi expresses through another exemplary figure, the swimmer who navigates dangerous rapids with perfect ease, "I go along with the natural makeup of the water and don't impose anything on it. This is how I stay afloat." This knowledge emerges not through conceptual analysis alone, but through prolonged, attentive engagement that gradually reveals the inherent patterns within phenomena. The agricultural metaphors prevalent in Taoist texts illuminate the subtle balance Wu-Wei achieves between deliberate cultivation and allowing natural processes to unfold. The wise farmer prepares soil, plants seeds, removes weeds, and ensures adequate water, creating optimal conditions for growth, without attempting to force the plants themselves to grow. Growth happens naturally when appropriate conditions are established. Attempting to accelerate it by pulling on seedlings only destroys what one wishes to nurture. As Chapter 64 of the Tao Te Ching advises, people in their activities fail when they are on the verge of success. Be as careful at the end as at the beginning, and there will be no failure. This agricultural wisdom extends beyond literal farming to all domains of human activity. The effective leader creates conditions where others flourish, rather than micromanaging their every action. The skilled teacher establishes an environment conducive to learning rather than forcing knowledge into resistant minds. The wise parent provides guidance and support while allowing children to develop according to their inherent nature. In each case, Wu-Wei involves neither abandoning responsibility nor imposing arbitrary control, but discerning and working with the inherent tendencies of situations and beings. The political implications of Wu-Wei prove particularly revolutionary within historical context. Against the legalist emphasis on strict laws and harsh punishments, and the Confucian focus on active moral cultivation, Taoist thought proposed governance based on minimal interference. As Chapter 57 of the Tao Te Ching suggests, the more prohibitions there are, the poorer the people become. The more weapons the people have, the more troubled the state becomes. Therefore, the sage says, I take no action and the people are transformed of themselves. I prefer stillness, and the people are rectified of themselves. This political vision doesn't advocate abandoning governance altogether, but transforming its quality from controlling intervention to creating conditions where natural harmony emerges. As Chapter 17 elaborates, the best ruler is one whose existence is barely known by the people. Next comes one who is loved and praised. Next comes one who is feared. Worst is one who is despised. Where there is lack of faith, there will be no faith in return. The best ruler speaks rarely, and when the task is accomplished and things have been completed, all the people say, "We did it ourselves." This description captures the paradoxical effectiveness of leadership that achieves its aims precisely by not forcing them, by working with rather than against the inherent tendencies of human nature and social dynamics. The martial application of Wu-Wei appears in traditional Chinese arts like Tai Chi Chuan, where effectiveness emerges not from opposing force with force, but from yielding to incoming energy in ways that redirect it with minimal exertion. The skilled practitioner develops such sensitivity to the opponent's movements that responses arise spontaneously, without calculation or strain. As the classic Tai Chi texts advise, use stillness to control movement and deflect 1,000 pounds with 4 ounces. These principles illustrate how yielding can prove more effective than resistance when combined with precise awareness and appropriate positioning. This martial wisdom extends metaphorically to all confrontations and challenges. The rigid tree breaks in strong winds, while the supple sapling bends and returns upright when the storm passes. Water, seemingly the softest substance, gradually carves channels through solid rock, not through opposition, but through persistent, flowing along paths of least resistance. As Chapter 43 of the Tao Te Ching observes, the softest thing in the world overcomes the hardest. This shows the advantage of taking no action, Wu-Wei. The contemporary relevance of Wu-Wei emerges through parallels with modern systems thinking and ecological awareness. Complex adaptive systems, from ecosystems to economies, often respond unpredictably to heavy-handed intervention. developing unforeseen consequences that create greater problems than those the intervention sought to solve. The Wu-Wei approach recognizes these complexities and works with rather than against the system's inherent tendencies, making minimal adjustments at leverage points rather than imposing comprehensive control. Psychologically, Wu-Wei addresses the paradox of happiness and flow states, how direct pursuit often proves self-defeating while indirect approaches succeed. As contemporary research confirms, the states of highest satisfaction and performance often occur when self-consciousness disappears into complete absorption in activity. The musician no longer plays the music but becomes a vessel through which music flows. The athlete no longer consciously controls movements but enters the zone, where action unfolds spontaneously with perfect precision. The artist no longer calculates effects but allows creation to emerge through them rather than from them. The same principle applies to sleep. How deliberate attempts to force oneself to sleep often create tension that prevents exactly what one seeks. Sleep comes most readily when we create appropriate conditions and then release the very effort of trying to sleep, allowing natural processes to unfold without interference. This common experience offers a nightly reminder of Wu-Wei's paradoxical effectiveness, how certain aims are best achieved precisely by not striving directly toward them. The aesthetic dimension of Wu-Wei appears in traditional Chinese arts, like landscape painting, poetry, and calligraphy, where the highest achievement involves such thorough integration of technique that the artist's individuality seems to disappear into the work itself. As 11th century painter Guoxi advised, "If you want to study the painting of clouds, you must observe the changing appearance of clouds over a long period of time. Only then can you express their essential nature." This observation points to how mastery emerges not through imposing preconceptions, but through such intimate familiarity with subject matter, that expression flows naturally from direct perception. The concept of Wu-Wei challenges modern productivity cultures obsessed with maximizing effort and optimization, against the assumption that effectiveness correlates directly with strenuousness. The Taoist perspective suggests that the highest achievement involves not more effort, but more appropriate engagement, discerning when to act vigorously, when to wait attentively, and when to step aside entirely according to specific circumstances, rather than abstract principles. As the Tao Te Ching advises, do that which consists in taking no action, and order will prevail. This nuanced approach recognizes timing as essential to effectiveness. Like the archer who releases the arrow neither too soon nor too late, or the musician who plays each note precisely when required, rather than rushing or dragging, Wu-Wei involves exquisite sensitivity to the rhythms inherent in situations. As Chapter 29 of the Tao Te Ching observes, the world is a sacred vessel that cannot be improved. Those who try to improve it ruin it. Those who try to grasp it lose it. This warning points not toward abandoning all action, but toward recognizing when intervention disrupts natural processes that would resolve themselves more effectively without interference. The relationship between Wu-Wei and Di, virtue or power, forms a central theme in Taoist thought. Unlike moral virtue achieved through strenuous effort against natural inclination, Di, in the Taoist sense, represents the natural power that emerges when actions align perfectly with circumstances. As Chapter 38 of the Tao Te Ching expresses, the highest virtue, Di, is not virtuous, and that is why it is virtue. The lowest virtue never loses sight of virtue, and that is why it is not virtue. This paradoxical statement points to how true virtue manifests not through deliberate moral striving, but through spontaneous alignment with natural principles, not by forcing oneself to be good, but by recognizing and expressing one's original nature. The contemporary teacher Eckhart Tolle expresses this understanding as awakened doing, action that flows not from egoic striving, but from alert presence. When you are in alignment with what is, you become a transparent vessel through which the intelligence of the universe can work. This description captures the essence of Wu-Wei as action arising not from separate selfhood, imposing its will upon circumstance, but from harmonious participation in the larger patterns of existence. Unlike approaches that emphasize either controlling circumstances or surrendering to them, Wu-Wei represents a middle path that transforms the very relationship between actor and situation. As sinologist François Julien observes, Chinese thought never established the kind of break between theory and practice that occurred in Greece. Instead of constructing an ideal form that one then projects onto things, one tries to detect the factors whose configuration makes up the propensity of things, in order to profit from that propensity. This practical orientation focuses not on abstract principles, but on discerning and working with the specific tendencies inherent in each unique situation. As consciousness transitions toward sleep, consider how Wu-Wei might manifest in your immediate experience. Notice how deliberate attempts to make yourself sleep often create precisely the tension that prevents sleep from coming naturally. Instead, observe how relaxing the very effort of trying to sleep, creating appropriate conditions, and then allowing natural processes to unfold without interference, aligns perfectly with the paradoxical effectiveness of Wu-Wei. May this ancient wisdom illuminate your understanding, revealing through both waking and dreaming the profound effectiveness that emerges not through straining against circumstances, but through perfect attunement to their inherent patterns, the spontaneous responsive engagement that Chinese philosophy calls Wu-Wei, where action becomes so aligned with circumstance that it seems to arise of itself, achieving maximum effect with minimum strain through perfect harmony between doer and done. The sacred pattern, Li, ritual principle. At the foundation of Confucian philosophy stands a concept so central to Chinese civilization that it shaped every dimension of social, political, and spiritual life for over 2 millennia. Li, often translated simply as ritual or propriety, but encompassing a far more comprehensive understanding of patterned, meaningful action, represents perhaps the most sophisticated approach to harmonizing individual expression with social cohesion ever developed in human thought. Unlike the Western conception of ritual as mere formality or empty ceremony, the Confucian understanding of Li comprises the entire spectrum of cultivated, meaningful human behavior, through which inner disposition and outer action achieve perfect alignment. From courtly ceremonies to everyday gestures, from ancestral veneration to casual greetings, Li encompasses all patterned behavior that embodies and transmits cultural values, maintains social harmony, and cultivates personal refinement. The Chinese character for Li combines the radical for spirit or divine, She, with a phonetic component, Li, suggesting abundance or richness, indicating that ritual encompasses both spiritual significance and cultural wealth. Early texts associate Li with sacrificial ceremonies honoring ancestors and deities, but Confucius expanded its meaning to embrace all human interactions guided by reverence, appropriateness, and awareness. As the master himself expressed in the Analects, to overcome self-centeredness and return to ritual propriety, Lai, is humaneness. If a person can overcome self-centeredness and return to ritual propriety for a single day, the whole world would recognize his humaneness. This statement reveals the profound connection between ritual form and moral substance in Confucian thought. External propriety, not as mere conformity, but as the manifestation of inner virtue. What makes Li particularly sophisticated as a philosophical concept is its integration of multiple dimensions often separated in Western thought: aesthetic form and ethical content, individual expression and social harmony, conserving tradition and adapting to changing circumstances. Unlike approaches that treat ritual as rigid formalism or empty convention, the Confucian understanding recognizes ritual as the living embodiment of cultural wisdom, patterns of interaction refined through centuries of experience to harmonize human relationships at every level, from family to state. Li operates simultaneously at three interconnected levels. At the personal level, it cultivates character through disciplined, reverent action that gradually transforms natural impulses into civilized expression. As the Analects states, the Master said, "The superior person is familiar with matters of righteousness. The small person is familiar with matters of profit." Through consistent ritual practice, one's spontaneous inclinations gradually align with ethical principles, transforming external compliance into authentic embodiment. At the social level, Li creates harmonious relationships by establishing appropriate patterns of interaction according to specific contexts and roles. Rather than treating all relationships as identical, Confucian thought recognizes their inherent differences: parent-child, ruler-subject, husband-wife, elder-younger, friend-friend, and prescribes distinct patterns of reciprocal obligation appropriate to each. This differentiation doesn't indicate inequality in human worth, but recognizes that harmonious relationships require appropriate role fulfillment rather than undifferentiated equality. At the cosmic level, Li aligns human society with the natural patterns of heaven and earth, creating a resonance between human action and cosmic order. As the classic text Doctrine of the Mean expresses, only those who are absolutely sincere can fully develop their nature. If they can fully develop their nature, they can fully develop the nature of others. If they can fully develop the nature of others, they can fully develop the nature of things. If they can fully develop the nature of things, they can assist in the transforming and nourishing process of heaven and earth. This alignment with cosmic principles transforms ritual from mere social convention into participation in the generative patterns of existence itself. Unlike Western approaches that often emphasize either individual autonomy or social conformity, the Confucian understanding of Li integrates these dimensions. True ritual propriety involves neither blind adherence to external forms nor unconstrained self-expression, but the achievement of perfect harmony between inner disposition and outer action, between personal authenticity and social responsibility. As the Doctrine of the Mean states, the superior person does what is proper to the station in which he finds himself. This balance becomes possible through what Confucian thought calls reverent attention, Jing, a quality of awareness that recognizes and responds appropriately to the unique requirements of each situation. Unlike rule following that mechanically applies fixed principles regardless of context, reverent attention discerns the inherent pattern appropriate to each circumstance and engages with it authentically. As the contemporary Confucian scholar Wu-Wei observes, The ritualization of the self is not a mechanical process of internalizing external constraints, but a conscious artistic effort to create a harmonious relationship between the inner core of one's being and one's outer manifestation. The relationship between Li, ritual propriety, and Ren, humaneness or benevolence, forms a central theme in Confucian ethics. While Li represents the external form, Ren constitutes the inner substance that gives ritual its authentic meaning. Without Ren, Li becomes empty formalism. Without Li, Ren lacks appropriate expression. The dynamic integration of these complementary aspects creates what Confucius called the complete person, Junzi, one whose inner virtue and outer behavior achieve perfect harmony. This integration appears in the Analects when Confucius states, "If a person lacks humanness, Ren, what can they do with rituals? Lie." And conversely, respectfulness without ritual becomes laborious bustle. Caution without ritual becomes timidity. Boldness without ritual becomes insubordination. Straightforwardness without ritual becomes rudeness. These observations reveal how ritual provides essential form for moral qualities, transforming abstract virtues into concrete expression, appropriate to specific contexts. The Confucian understanding of Li challenges modern assumptions that value spontaneity over form, or that view ritual as inherently constraining. Rather than opposing authentic expression, traditional Chinese thought recognizes that the highest spontaneity emerges through and within appropriate form, like the musician whose technical mastery allows for genuinely spontaneous expression, or the calligrapher whose disciplined brush technique enables true artistic freedom. As philosopher Herbert Fingeret observes in his classic study, Confucius, the secular is sacred. The holy is not a separate realm of being. It is our human world when seen and participated in with a particular vision and sensibility. This vision transforms how we understand everyday actions. In the Confucian perspective, even mundane activities like greeting a neighbor, serving tea, or arranging objects in space become opportunities for expressing and cultivating virtue. The careful attention given to appropriate form elevates ordinary interactions into meaningful ritual, not by making them artificially formal, but by recognizing and honoring the inherent significance they already contain. As contemporary philosopher Michael Puett suggests, the purpose of ritual is to create a momentary but powerful experience in which you break from your normal way of interacting with reality. The Book of Rites, Liji, one of the core Confucian classics, articulates how ritual propriety transforms natural human impulses into civilized expression. The principles of ritual have their origin in man's emotions, but those emotions assume definite forms only through the direction of ritual principles. This understanding recognizes that human feelings require appropriate channels of expression, not to suppress them, but to refine and direct them toward their most constructive manifestation. This refinement operates through what Confucian thought calls ritual internalization, Li Qin, the process through which external forms gradually transform inner dispositions. By consistently performing actions with reverent attention, one cultivates the very qualities the actions express. The novice may initially follow ritual forms mechanically, but with continued practice, the values embodied in the forms gradually become second nature. As the Analects records, "At 15 I set my heart on learning. At 30 I took my stand. At 40 I had no doubts. At 50 I knew the mandate of heaven. At 60 my ear was attuned. At 70, I could follow my heart's desire without transgressing what was right. This developmental sequence reveals how ritual cultivation gradually transforms external conformity into authentic embodiment, not by abandoning form, but by so thoroughly integrating it that it becomes one's spontaneous expression. The mature practitioner follows ritual, not through conscious effort, but through cultivated second nature. Like the skilled dancer who no longer thinks about the steps, but embodies the dance completely. The socio-political implications of Li extend far beyond personal cultivation. For Confucian thinkers, ritual propriety represents the foundation of effective governance and social harmony. As the Analects states, guide them by laws, regulate them by punishments, and the people will seek to evade the law and be without shame. Guide them by virtue, regulate them by the rules of propriety, and they will have a sense of shame and become good. This perspective recognizes that external compliance achieved through coercion creates superficial order at best, while ritual cultivation generates authentic harmony by transforming the values and dispositions from which action naturally flows. The contemporary relevance of Li emerges most clearly in what philosopher Alasdair MacIntyre calls practices, coherent, complex forms of socially established cooperative human activity through which goods internal to that activity are realized. From medicine to education, from scientific research to artistic creation, meaningful human activities require sophisticated patterns of interaction that simultaneously preserve tradition and allow for creative innovation. The Confucian understanding of ritual propriety offers profound insight into how these practices might achieve both stability and adaptability through reverent participation in evolving traditions. What distinguishes the Confucian approach to ritual from mere conventionalism is its emphasis on the proper spirit that animates external forms. As the Book of Rites observes, when performing ritual, what matters is reverential attention, Jing. Without this reverence, ritual becomes mere routine. This spirit transforms ritual from empty ceremony into authentic expression, not by abandoning form, but by infusing it with genuine presence, like the difference between mechanically reciting memorized words and speaking with heartfelt conviction. The creative tension between reverence for established forms and adaptation to changing circumstances animates the entire history of Confucian thought. While emphasizing the importance of tradition, Confucius himself demonstrated remarkable flexibility in applying ritual principles to new contexts. As he stated, the Yin dynasty followed the ritual of the Xia. What they added and subtracted can be known. The Zhou followed the ritual of the Yin. What they added and subtracted can be known. Those who follow the Zhou, even 100 generations from now, can be known. This observation recognizes that ritual evolves through carefully considered adaptations rather than wholesale invention or rigid preservation. This balanced approach challenges both conservative rigidity and progressive rejection of tradition. The Confucian perspective suggests that meaningful innovation occurs not through abandoning established patterns, but through creative engagement with them, preserving their essential wisdom while adapting their expression to new circumstances. As philosopher Roger Ames observes, the Chinese ritualized world is a world of organic harmony, rather than hierarchical order, a world of continuity and correlation, rather than hypostatized dualities. The aesthetic dimension of Li appears throughout traditional Chinese culture, in the careful composition of gardens, the precise movements of martial arts, the measured brushstrokes of calligraphy, and the subtle interactions of poetry. In each domain, mastery involves not unlimited self-expression, but disciplined participation in established forms that simultaneously preserve tradition and allow for individual interpretation. As calligrapher and philosopher Kazuaki Tanahashi notes, in the East, the highest art is the art that conceals art, where technical mastery becomes so complete that the form appears natural rather than contrived. This aesthetic sensibility extends to everyday life through what might be called the ritual of the ordinary. The careful attention given to arranging objects in space, preparing and serving food, greeting guests, or entering a room. Each activity becomes an opportunity for expressing harmony between inner disposition and outer action, between individual expression and cultural pattern. As philosopher Thomas Kasulis observes, for East Asian cultural sensibilities, the everyday can be an occasion for the sacred if only we approach it with mindfulness. Unlike Western approaches that often separate religious ritual from secular life, the Confucian understanding integrates these dimensions. As Herbert Fingaret expresses it, for Confucius, the ceremony that is sacred is not a special kind of ceremony. Rather, ceremony or ritual as such is sacred. The secular is sacred. This perspective transforms ordinary social interactions into opportunities for participating in meaningful patterns that transcend purely utilitarian purposes, embedding everyday life within a framework of ultimate significance. The relationship between ritual and music receives particular emphasis in Confucian thought. The Analects records, the master said, "It is by the odes that the mind is aroused. It is by the rules of propriety that the character is established. It is from music that the finish is received." This triad, poetry to inspire appropriate feelings, ritual to guide appropriate action, and music to harmonize feeling and action, creates what Chinese tradition calls ritual music, Li-Yue, where external form and inner spirit achieve perfect integration through aesthetic experience. This integration challenges modern tendencies to separate reason from emotion, intellectual understanding from embodied practice. The Confucian perspective recognizes that full human development requires not abstract knowledge alone, but embodied wisdom expressed through appropriate action. As contemporary philosopher Karen Lai observes, moral self-cultivation is not simply a matter of understanding abstract moral principles, but of embodying them and expressing them through one's entire being. As consciousness transitions towards sleep, consider how Li might manifest in your immediate experience. Notice how even the simple ritual of preparing for sleep, perhaps arranging your space, following a consistent sequence of actions, or quieting the mind through familiar patterns, creates a meaningful transition between waking activity and restful repose. These patterns serve not merely practical functions, but create a reverent attention that transforms mundane actions into meaningful ritual, not by making them artificially formal, but by recognizing and honoring the significance they already contain. May this ancient wisdom illuminate your understanding, revealing through both waking and dreaming how cultivated patterns of meaningful action create harmony between inner disposition and outer behavior, between individual expression and social connection, between human society and cosmic order. In recognizing and participating in these patterns with reverent attention, we discover what Confucian thought has always recognized, that the sacred dwells not in some separate realm, but in the very patterns of relationship through which we express our humanity in each ordinary moment. The lightning flash, Satori, At the heart of Zen Buddhism lies a mode of awakening so immediate, direct, and transformative that it defies conventional understanding. Satori, literally comprehension or understanding in Japanese, represents not gradual accumulation of knowledge, but sudden, direct insight into the nature of reality and mind beyond all conceptual frameworks. Unlike progressive attainments or sequential development, Satori manifests as an abrupt breakthrough, a discontinuous leap from ordinary dualistic consciousness into non-dual awareness that reveals reality as it is before the mind, divides it into subject and object, self and other, knower and known. The term derives from the Japanese verb satoru, meaning to know or to understand, but in Zen context indicates a knowing fundamentally different from intellectual comprehension. While conventional knowledge operates through dualistic subject-object relationships, a knower perceiving something known as separate from themselves, Satori dissolves this fundamental division. As the renowned Zen master Dogen expressed it, to study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be enlightened by all things. This forgetting doesn't indicate oblivion, but the falling away of the constructed sense of a separate self, standing apart from experience. In Satori, the artificial boundary between observer and observed momentarily collapses, revealing a direct intimacy with existence, unmediated by conceptual thought. As 20th century Zen master Koun Yamada described it, in the state of Satori, subject and object are completely identified. This complete identification is not a psychological state, but an ontological fact. What distinguishes Satori from other forms of spiritual insight is its suddenness and completeness. Unlike practices that emphasize gradual purification or development, Zen points to the possibility of immediate awakening, a direct recognition of what has always been present but overlooked. The 12th century Chinese master Dahui Zonggao emphasized this abruptness. Enlightenment must come in a single, incisive awakening, like cutting a skein of thread. When one strand is cut, all are cut. It is by no means a gradual and cumulative process. This emphasis on suddenness doesn't negate the value of gradual practice, but points to the discontinuous nature of the insight itself. As contemporary teacher Shunryu Suzuki explained, for the beginner, practice and enlightenment are two, but for the advanced student, they are one. The paradox of Zen training lies in the methodical cultivation of conditions that allow for a breakthrough that cannot itself be produced through method, like diligently tending a garden while recognizing that the moment of blossoming occurs according to its own timing. Zen practice creates optimal conditions for an awakening that ultimately happens by itself. The sudden, non-linear nature of Satori finds vivid expression in Zen art, particularly the spontaneous brushwork of Zenga paintings and the immediate presence of haiku poetry. The latter, with its juxtaposition of concrete images that create a moment of insight beyond what either image alone could convey, parallels the structure of Satori itself, a perspective shift that reveals what was always present but unrecognized. As the 17th century master Basho wrote, "An old pond, a frog jumps in, sound of water." This minimalist verse doesn't explain or analyze, but presents reality directly, allowing the reader to participate in the immediate presence of experience before conceptual division. In similar fashion, Satori reveals not new information, but a new way of perceiving what is already present. Direct engagement with reality unmediated by the conceptual filters that typically separate us from immediate experience. The catalyst for Satori often appears in seemingly insignificant incidents: hearing a stone strike bamboo, feeling the morning breeze, stubbing a toe, or receiving an unexpected shout or blow from a Zen master. These ordinary occurrences occasionally precipitate extraordinary shifts in perception, not because they contain special power, but because they momentarily interrupt the mind's habitual patterns, creating an opening where direct perception can occur. As the contemporary teacher Charlotte Joko Beck observed, enlightenment is not something you achieve. It is the absence of something. This absence refers to the falling away of the conceptual structures that ordinarily filter and divide experience. In their absence, reality reveals itself directly, not as something separate from awareness, but as awareness itself manifesting in countless forms. The 13th century Japanese Zen master Dogen expressed this non-dual perspective. Flowers fall even though we love them. Weeds grow even though we dislike them. This observation points to the directness of reality beyond our conceptual categories and preferences, the suchness or thusness, tathata, of things as they are. Zen traditions developed specific methods to cultivate the conditions conducive to Satori, primarily zazen, seated meditation, and koan practice. Unlike meditation techniques focused on achieving special states, traditional Zen meditation emphasizes just sitting, shikantaza, alert, present awareness without manipulation of experience. This seemingly simple practice gradually exhausts the mind's habitual tendency to divide experience into self and other, creating space for direct perception to emerge naturally. Koan practice approaches the same non-dual awareness through deliberate engagement with paradoxical questions or statements like, "What is the sound of one hand clapping?" or "What was your face before your parents were born?" These enigmatic phrases function not as riddles to be solved intellectually, but as devices to exhaust logical thinking and create an opening where direct insight can occur. As the contemporary teacher John Dido Lurie explained, koans are not designed to encourage conceptualization, but to extinguish it so that the mind can realize its true nature. The historical Buddha's awakening established the archetype for Satori. After years of ascetic practice followed by abandoning such extremes, he sat in meditation through the night, experiencing a profound breakthrough at dawn. The Pali Canon records him declaring, "Wonder of wonders. All beings have the Tathagata's wisdom and virtue, but they fail to realize it because of their delusions and attachments." This recognition of inherent Buddha nature, Tathagata Garbha, as already present, yet typically unrecognized, forms the foundation for Zen's emphasis on direct realization rather than acquisition or development. This understanding challenges conventional views of spiritual practice as progressive development toward a distant goal. In the Zen perspective, awakening involves not adding something new, but recognizing what has always been present, like suddenly noticing the eyeglasses you've been wearing while searching frantically for them. As the 9th century Chinese master Linji Rinzai instructed his students, "If you want to be no different from the patriarchs and Buddhas, then never seek for anything outside yourselves." What makes Satori particularly challenging to discuss is that it represents not merely a different content of knowledge, but a different way of knowing altogether, one that transcends the very subject-object structure that language presupposes. Traditional Zen texts resort to negation, paradox, and metaphor precisely because direct description proves impossible within conventional linguistic frameworks based on subject-verb-object relationships, which inherently reinforce the dualistic perception that Satori transcends. Despite these limitations, the experience itself remains not merely theoretical, but accessible to consciousness when the conceptual filters that typically obscure direct perception are temporarily suspended. Zen Master Hakuin Ikaku, 1686 to 1768, described his own experience of Satori. Suddenly, the great earth beneath me, with its mountains and rivers, completely disappeared. It was as though I found myself in the midst of a vast, empty, transparent sky. The distinction between inside and outside, self and other, vanished. This description points to Satori not as mystical transportation to another realm, but as clear perception of this reality without the distorting filters of conceptual division. Nothing objectively changes in such moments. Rather, the way of perceiving changes fundamentally. As contemporary teacher Adyashanti observes, enlightenment is not a change at all. It is simply the recognition of what already is, what has been there all along, but was being overlooked. The transformative impact of Satori varies considerably. In some cases, a single breakthrough permanently shifts one's relationship with experience. In others, the insight fades and requires further cultivation to stabilize. Zen traditions recognize both kensho, initial glimpse, or seeing the nature, and deeper satori, with even the latter requiring integration through continued practice. The 12th century Chinese master Hongji Zhengjue noted, "The brightness of the pearl illuminates the body first, then illumines the 10,000 things as well." This integration process involves embodying the non-dual insight within daily activities, what Zen calls carrying water and chopping wood. Unlike spiritual paths that emphasize transcendence of ordinary life, Zen focuses on transforming our relationship with everyday experience through direct presence. The famous ox herding pictures, a series of 10 images depicting the path of practice, culminate not in otherworldly transcendence, but in returning to the marketplace with helping hands, engaging fully in ordinary life, while maintaining the perspective revealed through Satori. Contemporary neuroscience offers intriguing parallels with traditional descriptions of Satori. Research on the default mode network, DMN, brain regions active during self-referential thinking, suggests that certain meditative states involve temporary deactivation of these networks, potentially corresponding to the falling away of the self described in Zen. Similarly, studies of flow states reveal how focused engagement can temporarily suspend self-consciousness, creating experiences of absorption similar to what Zen describes as becoming one with an activity. These scientific perspectives don't reduce Satori to mere neural correlates, but offer complementary descriptions of how the constructed sense of separate selfhood, maintained through specific patterns of neural activity, might temporarily dissolve, allowing direct experience unmediated by conceptual division. As philosopher Evan Thompson suggests, contemplative traditions in neuroscience may offer different levels of description of the same underlying reality, rather than competing explanations. The ethical implications of Satori extend beyond personal transformation. When the illusory boundary between self and other temporarily dissolves, compassionate action emerges not from obligation, but from direct recognition of interconnection. As the contemporary teacher Joan Halifax observes, in the experience of direct presence, compassion arises organically. It's not something we have to construct. This ethical dimension distinguishes authentic Satori from mere altered states or peak experiences that might feel extraordinary, but fail to transform fundamental patterns of relationship. Unlike spiritual paths that emphasize escaping suffering through transcendence, Zen recognizes suffering itself as the very ground of awakening. The heart of Buddhist teaching lies in the recognition that suffering arises from ignorance of our true nature, specifically the illusion of separate selfhood and the grasping and aversion this illusion generates. Satori addresses suffering at its root by revealing the constructed nature of the very self that seems to suffer, not negating pain but transforming our relationship with it through direct insight into its empty, interdependent nature. This transformation doesn't eliminate difficulty but changes how we experience it, from personal affliction happening to a separate self to recognized aspect of the total field of awareness. As 13th century Japanese Zen master Dogen expressed it, to carry the self forward and illuminate myriad things is delusion. That myriad things come forth and illuminate the self is awakening. This shift in perspective reveals suffering not as punishment or meaningless affliction, but as the natural consequence of particular conditions that can potentially transform through clear seeing. The concept of Satori challenges fundamental assumptions about human consciousness and its relationship to reality. While conventional understanding posits a subject perceiving objects as separate from themselves, Satori reveals this division as a constructed overlay rather than an inherent feature of consciousness. What remains when this overlay temporarily dissolves is not mindless merger, but a more direct, immediate perception unmediated by conceptual categories, what Zen calls the original face before your parents were born. This original face doesn't represent some special state separate from ordinary experience, but the ground of all experience recognized directly. As the contemporary teacher John Kabat-Zinn expresses it, mindfulness is not about getting anywhere else, it's about being where you already are. Satori similarly reveals not something new but what has always been present, yet overlooked, the immediate, direct presence of reality before conceptual division into subject and object, self and other, inside and outside. As consciousness transitions toward sleep, consider how this principle of Satori might manifest in your immediate experience. Notice how the ordinary mind with its categories, judgments, and narratives naturally begins to quiet as sleep approaches. In the liminal space between waking and dreaming, conceptual boundaries soften, and awareness may occasionally recognize its own nature directly, not as something separate from experience, but as the very knowing in which all experience appears. This natural transition offers a nightly opportunity to glimpse what Zen points toward, the falling away of constructed selfhood and the emergence of direct perception, unmediated by conceptual division, neither forced through effort nor achieved through technique. This shift happens naturally when the conditions allow, when the conceptual mind, with its ceaseless categorization and commentary, temporarily quiets, revealing the direct, immediate presence that has never been absent, only overlooked. May this ancient wisdom illuminate your understanding, revealing through both waking and dreaming that the sudden awakening Zen, called Satori, represents not distant achievement, but the direct recognition of what has always been present, the clear, immediate awareness in which all phenomena arise, exist briefly, and dissolve, like waves appearing and disappearing on the ocean of consciousness itself. The ultimate reality, Satchitananda. At the pinnacle of Vedantic metaphysics stands a concept so comprehensive yet elegantly simple that it encompasses the entire spectrum of existence, while pointing to the fundamental nature of reality itself. Satchitananda, a Sanskrit compound uniting Sat, being, existence, chit, consciousness, awareness, and Ananda, bliss, joy, represents not three separate qualities, but the unified, indivisible nature of ultimate reality. This triune formulation suggests that at its essence, existence is conscious and inherently blissful. Consciousness by nature exists and contains joy, and the deepest joy is inseparable from pure being and awareness. This non-dual understanding emerges most fully in Advaita Vedanta, though variants appear across multiple Hindu philosophical schools, unlike Western philosophical frameworks that often separate ontology, the study of being, epistemology, the study of knowing, and axiology, the study of value. Satchitananda integrates these dimensions into a unified understanding, recognizing that at the most fundamental level, existence itself is conscious and inherently contains its own value or fulfillment. This integration challenges the notion that consciousness somehow emerges from unconscious matter, or that value represents mere subjective projection onto a neutral universe. The Sanskrit terms comprising this compound require careful examination to grasp their profound implications. Sat, derives from the root as, meaning to be, indicating not simply physical existence, but being itself, the fundamental isness that underlies all manifestation. It points to what remains unchanging amid constant change, the substrate that persists through all transformations, as the Chandogya Upanishad declares. In the beginning, my dear, there was only being, Sat, one, without a second. This being precedes all distinctions, including the division between subject and object, knower and known. Chit, represents consciousness not as a property or product of physical systems, but as the fundamental knowing principle that makes all experience possible. Unlike contemporary materialist views that treat consciousness as emerging from neural complexity, the Vedantic perspective sees awareness as irreducible, the ground in which all phenomena appear rather than a phenomenon itself. Chit indicates not merely conscious content, but the conscious principle that knows all content while itself remaining unchanged, like the light that illuminates objects while remaining distinct from what it illuminates. Ananda, Anand, refers not to transient pleasure, dependent on external circumstances, but to the intrinsic bliss or fulfillment inherent in pure being and awareness. This bliss emerges not from acquiring what we lack, but from recognizing the completeness already present in our essential nature. As the Taittiriya Upanishad expresses, Brahman is bliss. For truly beings here are born from bliss. When born they live by bliss, and into bliss they enter upon departing. This understanding suggests that joy represents not an occasional emotional state, but the fundamental nature of reality when experienced directly, without the veiling of ignorance. The compound Satchitananda serves as the most comprehensive designation for Brahman, the boundless, absolute reality that both transcends and includes all manifestation. Unlike dualistic conceptions that separate creator from creation, the Vedantic understanding sees Brahman not as an entity separate from the universe, but as the very substance and consciousness of which the universe consists. As the Mundaka Upanishad expresses through metaphor, as a spider sends forth and draws in its thread, as herbs grow from the earth, as hair grows from the head and body of a person, so from the imperishable arises this universe. This understanding transforms how we conceive of our own nature. If Brahman as Satchitananda constitutes the fundamental reality, and if, as Advaita Vedanta asserts, our own deepest essence, Atman, is identical with Brahman, then our essential nature must likewise be Satchitananda, pure existence consciousness bliss. As the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad declares, this self is Brahman. The spiritual journey involves not acquiring something new, but recognizing what we already are beneath the layers of identification with body, mind, personal history, and social identity. What obscures this recognition? Vedantic analysis identifies avidya, ignorance, as the primary obstacle. Not mere lack of information, but a fundamental misperception that mistakes the limited, changing aspects of experience for our essential nature. This ignorance manifests through adhyasa, superimposition, projecting attributes of one thing onto another, like perceiving a rope as a snake in dim light. We superimpose limitations, divisions, and incompleteness onto the boundless Satchitananda that constitutes our true nature. This superimposition creates the suffering inherent in ordinary consciousness. When we identify exclusively with the body, we fear illness and death. When we identify with particular thoughts or beliefs, we feel threatened by contradictory perspectives. When we seek fulfillment through transient pleasures, we experience inevitable disappointment when they fade. Each limited identification obscures the boundless being consciousness bliss that represents our authentic identity beyond temporal manifestations. The great 8th century philosopher Adi Shankaracharya systematized this understanding into a comprehensive philosophical framework. He observed that while relative reality, Maya, displays endless diversity and change, the absolute reality, Brahman, remains one without a second, unchanging, undivided, and self-luminous. The appearance of multiplicity emerges not from actual division in reality itself, but from avidya, the misperception that mistakes the changing forms for the unchanging essence, like perceiving many different ornaments while overlooking the gold that constitutes them all. Shankaracharya employed the metaphor of space contained in various pots to illustrate the relationship between individual consciousness and universal consciousness. Just as the space within each pot is not actually separate from the space surrounding it, but appears distinct due to the pot's boundaries, individual consciousness appears separate from universal consciousness due only to the apparent boundaries of body and mind. When these conceptual boundaries dissolve through clear recognition, the inherent unity of consciousness reveals itself. This recognition doesn't negate relative reality, but contextualizes it within a more comprehensive understanding. The phenomenal world continues to operate according to natural laws, and distinctions remain pragmatically useful within relative existence. The difference lies in how we interpret this relative reality, not as separate from consciousness, but as its expression, not as existing independently, but as manifesting within the limitless field of Satchitananda. Swami Vivekananda, who introduced many Vedantic concepts to Western audiences in the late 19th century, explained, "Taking the absolute view, no manifested thing has reality. Only the absoluta, devoid of all attributes, remains. But taking the relative view, the whole universe is real, inasmuch as the absolute is the basis of all this manifestation." This integration of absolute and relative perspectives allows engagement with conventional reality while maintaining awareness of its ultimate nature. Unlike philosophical systems that reach ultimate reality through abstracting from concrete experience, the Vedantic approach to Satchitananda emphasizes direct recognition in immediate awareness. The 20th century sage Ramana Maharshi directed seekers toward self-inquiry, investigating the source of the I thought to discover the pure awareness that precedes and transcends individual identity. This investigation reveals that consciousness itself, not its changing contents, constitutes our most fundamental nature. The contemporary teacher Rupert Spira expresses this direct approach. Awareness cannot be known the way we know an object, but awareness knows itself in a much more intimate way. It doesn't know itself the way I know you, from a distance, as an object. It knows itself by being itself. This knowing by being points to the non-dual nature of Satchitananda, where existence, awareness, and fulfillment are not separate aspects, but the indivisible reality of what we most essentially are. Vedantic traditions offer various approaches to realizing this non-dual understanding. Jnana Yoga employs rigorous philosophical discrimination to distinguish between the changing phenomena of experience and the unchanging awareness in which they appear. Bhakti Yoga cultivates devotional love that gradually dissolves the sense of separation between devotee and divine. Karma Yoga purifies consciousness through selfless action performed without attachment to results. Raja Yoga employs systematic meditation practices to still the fluctuations of mind and reveal the pure awareness beneath thought. Despite these diverse methods, the essential recognition remains the same, that Satchitananda represents not a distant reality to be achieved, but our true nature to be discovered beneath the veiling of ignorance. As the contemporary teacher Adyashanti observes, enlightenment is a destructive process. It has nothing to do with becoming better or being happier. Enlightenment is the crumbling away of untruth. It's seeing through the facade of pretense. It's the complete eradication of everything we imagined to be true. What makes this understanding particularly challenging for modern minds is its inversion of conventional assumptions about consciousness. While contemporary scientific frameworks typically view consciousness as a product or property of physical systems, particularly neural networks, the Vedantic perspective sees consciousness as primary, the fundamental reality in which all physical manifestation appears. As the Aitareya Upanishad declares, in the beginning, all this was indeed Atman self alone. He created all this, whatever there is. This perspective finds resonance in certain interpretations of quantum physics, particularly the recognition that observation plays a fundamental role in determining physical reality. While simplistic claims about quantum physics proving Vedantic concepts should be avoided, philosophers like Bernardo Kastrup note intriguing parallels between the Vedantic understanding of consciousness as primary and interpretations of quantum mechanics that recognize the inseparability of observer and observed. The practical implications of Satchitananda extend far beyond theoretical understanding. If our essential nature is indeed being consciousness bliss, then seeking fulfillment through acquiring external objects, experiences, or achievements fundamentally misunderstands where fulfillment actually resides. The 16th century Saint Tukaram expressed this insight. The moon's reflection can be seen in 1,000,000 pots of water, but the reflection is not the moon. The real moon is beyond all reflections. Though I see my face reflected in the mirror, when I close my eyes, I can see my face no more, but I still exist. This understanding transforms our relationship with experience itself. Pleasure need not be grasped because the deepest joy lies not in temporary sensations, but in our fundamental nature. Pain need not be frantically avoided because it appears within the boundless awareness that remains untouched by changing conditions. Achievement need not define worth because our essential nature already contains the fullness that all achievement ultimately seeks. As contemporary teacher Muji observes, The recognition of our true nature is not a belief, not a secret, not an achievement, and not even a realization. For who would it be that realizes? It is simply the end of ignorance. The concept of Satchitananda challenges fundamental assumptions about human consciousness and its relationship to reality. While conventional understanding posits consciousness as emerging from unconscious matter, creating the hard problem of how subjective experience could arise from objective processes, the Vedantic perspective inverts this relationship, seeing consciousness as the primary reality from which all manifestation emerges. As philosopher Alan Watts expressed it, the prevalent sensation of oneself as a separate ego enclosed in a bag of skin is a hallucination. The only real you is the one that comes and goes, manifests and withdraws itself eternally in and as every conscious being. This non-dual perspective dissolves the boundaries we typically perceive between self and world, between subject and object. As the contemporary teacher Rupert Spira explains, we don't look at the world, we look from and as the world. This recognition transforms not just abstract understanding, but lived experience itself, revealing that what we call consciousness and what we call world represent not separate realities, but different aspects of the unified field of Satchitananda, manifesting in endless creative expression. The triune nature of Satchitananda offers profound insight into the structure of all experience. Every perception, every thought, every feeling contains these three aspects. Existence, it is. Consciousness, it is known. And some quality on the spectrum from pleasure to pain. It feels somehow. Even experiences we label negative or painful demonstrate these dimensions. They exist, are known by consciousness, and contain their own intensity that, when met with complete presence, may reveal unexpected depth beneath surface reactivity. This understanding suggests that the bliss dimension of Satchitananda differs fundamentally from what we commonly call happiness or pleasure. It represents not a particular emotional state dependent on favorable conditions, but the inherent fulfillment in pure being and awareness when recognized directly. As the contemporary teacher Ram Dass observed, the game is not about becoming somebody. It's about becoming nobody. This becoming nobody points not toward nihilistic emptiness, but toward recognition of the boundless being consciousness bliss that transcends, yet includes all individual identities. The integration of existence, consciousness, and bliss in the single compound Satchitananda suggests their inseparability at the most fundamental level. We cannot have one without the others because they represent not separate qualities, but different aspects of the same indivisible reality. As philosopher Ken Wilber notes, the nature of consciousness is Satchitananda, or infinite existence, infinite awareness, and infinite bliss. To look into your awareness and find this ultimate reality is to find infinite existence. All things in the entire universe exist in and as your present awareness. As consciousness transitions towards sleep, consider how Satchitananda might manifest in your immediate experience. Notice how awareness itself, the simple fact of knowing, continues even as the contents of awareness change. This knowing presence, neither created when you awake nor destroyed when you sleep, points toward what Vedanta identifies as your true nature beyond changing phenomena. As thoughts and perceptions naturally quiet, the being consciousness bliss that constitutes your essential nature may reveal itself more directly, not as special experience, but as the ground of all experience recognized, without the veiling of conceptual thought. This natural transition offers a nightly opportunity to glimpse what Vedantic traditions point toward, the recognition that consciousness itself, rather than its changing contents, represents our most fundamental nature, neither created when we awake, nor destroyed when we sleep. This knowing presence points toward what various traditions call Brahman, Atman, or simply awareness, the boundless Satchitananda that constitutes both world and self. May this ancient wisdom illuminate your understanding, revealing through both waking and dreaming that the ultimate reality traditions call Satchitananda represents not distant achievement, but the direct recognition of what has always been present, the boundless being consciousness bliss, in which all phenomena arise, exist briefly, and dissolve, like waves appearing and disappearing on the infinite ocean of existence itself. The perfection of wisdom, Prajna. At the heart of Buddhist philosophy lies a form of knowing so profound it transcends the very boundaries of conventional knowledge itself. Prajna, often translated as wisdom, but more accurately understood as transcendent, non-dual awareness, represents not merely accumulated information or conceptual understanding, but a radical shift in how consciousness apprehends reality. Neither mystical intuition nor rational analysis alone. Prajna embodies the direct recognition of the true nature of phenomena, beyond the distorting filters of conceptual elaboration and habitual perception. The Sanskrit term combines pra, before, forward, intense, with jaijinya, to know, suggesting a knowing that precedes or transcends ordinary cognition, a direct perception that cuts through the veils of ignorance to reveal reality as it is. In Mahayana Buddhism, Prajna holds such significance that an entire class of sutras, the Prajnaparamita, or perfection of wisdom texts, explores its nature and cultivation, with the Heart Sutra and Diamond Sutra standing as its most concentrated expressions. What distinguishes prajna from conventional knowledge? While ordinary understanding operates through dualistic subject-object relationships, a knower perceiving something known as separate from themselves, prajna dissolves this fundamental division. As the Heart Sutra declares, form is emptiness, emptiness is form. This paradoxical statement points not to nihilistic negation, but to the non-dual nature of authentic wisdom that recognizes neither an independent perceiver nor independently existing objects of perception. The relationship between conventional knowledge, the vijnana, and transcendent wisdom, prajna, forms a central theme in Buddhist epistemology. Conventional knowledge, while pragmatically useful for navigating relative reality, ultimately reinforces the fundamental ignorance, avidya, that Buddhism identifies as the root of suffering, the misperception of phenomena as possessing fixed, inherent existence separate from the mind perceiving them. Prajna penetrates this illusion, revealing the empty, interdependent nature of both self and world. This understanding doesn't negate conventional distinctions, but contextualizes them within a more comprehensive recognition of their ultimate nature. The Indian Buddhist philosopher Nagarjuna, circa 150 to 250 CE, systematized this understanding in his Madhyamaka, or Middle Way philosophy, demonstrating through rigorous logical analysis that when we search for the inherent, independent existence of any phenomenon, whether physical objects, mental constructs, or the self, we find instead a web of relationships, causes, and conditions with no fixed essence at its core. Nagarjuna's analysis leads not to nihilism, but to a middle way between the extremes of eternalism, the belief in unchanging, inherently existing entities, and nihilism, the denial of meaningful existence altogether. As he writes in his Mula Madhyama Kakarika, whatever arises dependently is explained as empty. Thus, dependent attribution is the middle way. Since nothing arises without depending on something, nothing exists that is not empty. This emptiness, sunyata, doesn't indicate non-existence but the absence of independent inherent existence. Precisely what Prajna directly perceives. The cultivation of Prajna involves a systematic deconstruction of our habitual ways of perceiving and conceptualizing reality. Buddhist traditions offer various approaches to this cultivation, from analytical meditation that systematically examines phenomena to discover their lack of inherent existence, to direct pointing out instructions that reveal the nature of mind beyond conceptual elaboration, to the study and contemplation of paradoxical statements, koans designed to exhaust the conceptual mind and create an opening for direct insight. The 8th century Indian Buddhist master, Shantideva, emphasizes the active cultivation of prajna through both study and meditation. One should stabilize the mind in meditation after engaging in the activity of proper, thorough investigation. This integrated approach recognizes that while conceptual understanding provides essential orientation, direct realization requires transcending conceptualization altogether, using concepts to point beyond concepts, like using a thorn to remove a thorn before discarding both. Unlike some mystical traditions that disparage rational inquiry, Buddhist approaches to prajna engage rigorously with logical analysis, recognizing it as an essential tool for clearing away misconceptions that obstruct direct perception. As the contemporary teacher B. Alan Wallace observes, the Buddhist tradition emphasizes that the cultivation of critical intelligence is indispensable to spiritual awakening, while unquestioning faith and blind obedience are condemned as contrary to the path to liberation. This critical intelligence operates not to accumulate information, but to systematically dismantle the conceptual constructs that obscure direct perception. The Diamond Sutra expresses this deconstructive function through a series of paradoxical statements. The Buddha taught the perfection of wisdom as no perfection of wisdom, and therefore it is called the perfection of wisdom. The Tathagata, Buddha, teaches a doctrine that appears as a raft. It should be abandoned, not to speak of a non-doctrine. These self-negating formulations point to how prajna transcends the very conceptual frameworks used to approach it. Dogen, the 13th century Japanese Zen master, expresses how prajna transforms our relationship with phenomena. To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be enlightened by all things. This forgetting doesn't indicate oblivion, but the release of rigid identification with a separate self, allowing direct perception of the interdependent nature of existence. When the self is no longer perceived as an isolated entity, standing apart from experience, all phenomena become expressions of wisdom rather than objects known by a separate knower. The integration of prajna into everyday experience distinguishes Buddhist approaches to wisdom from purely theoretical or philosophical understanding. As the Indian Buddhist master Atisha taught, the supreme instruction is the constant observation of the mind. This observation eventually reveals that what we take to be solid, independent realities, both inner and outer, actually arise dependently. exist temporarily, and lack any fixed, inherent nature. This recognition, when deeply integrated, transforms perception itself rather than merely changing the content of what is perceived. Throughout Buddhist traditions, prajna is closely associated with compassion, karuna. Far from being separate virtues, these qualities represent two aspects of the same realization. Wisdom recognizes the interdependent, empty nature of all phenomena, while compassion expresses the natural response to this recognition. When we directly perceive that apparent boundaries between self and other lack inherent existence, compassionate action emerges not as an obligation imposed from outside, but as the spontaneous expression of wisdom itself. The 8th century Indian Buddhist master Shantideva expresses this integration. All those who suffer in the world do so because of their desire for their own happiness. All those happy in the world are so because of their desire for the happiness of others. This statement points to how wisdom naturally transforms self-centered motivation into recognition of interdependence, demonstrating that profound ethical insight emerges directly from accurate perception of reality, rather than from external moral commandments. Beyond its ethical implications, prajna transforms epistemology itself, not merely what we know, but how we know. The direct, non-dual awareness that prajna represents transcends both intellectual analysis and intuitive feeling, while integrating the clarity of the former with the immediacy of the latter. Unlike both rational knowledge, which maintains separation between knower and known, and mystical merger, which loses discriminating clarity, prajna preserves precise discrimination within non-dual awareness, a knowing that neither divides reality into separate entities, nor blurs essential distinctions. This capacity for discrimination without dichotomy appears throughout Buddhist traditions in the metaphor of Indra's net, a cosmic web of jewels, each reflecting all others while maintaining its particular position in the network. This image illustrates how prajna perceives both the unique particularity of each phenomenon and its complete interpenetration with all others, without contradiction between these perspectives. The relative and absolute truths appear as complementary rather than contradictory, different dimensions of the same reality, rather than competing versions of it. The Lankavatara Sutra describes this integration through the concept of turning about in the deepest seat of consciousness, asraya paravritti, a fundamental shift in how awareness operates, transforming the very foundation of perception rather than merely its contents. This transformation doesn't create something new, but reveals what was always present, yet obscured by habitual patterns of conceptualization and identification. As the sutra states, things are not what they seem, neither are they otherwise. This paradoxical expression points to how prajna transcends both naive realism, the belief that things exist exactly as we perceive them, and complete negation, the belief that nothing exists at all. The middle way that prajna reveals recognizes conventional reality as neither absolutely real nor completely unreal, but as dependently arisen appearances, like reflections in water that truly appear, yet lack independent, inherent existence, apart from the conditions that give rise to them. In Tibetan Buddhism, prajna manifests through the practice of dzogchen, great perfection, which distinguishes between ordinary mind, sem, with its dualistic structure, and the nature of mind, rigpa, that recognizes its own essence directly. As the contemporary teacher Sokni Rinpoche explains, rigpa is a Tibetan word that means intelligence or knowing. But when the texts talk about rigpa in the context of dzogchen, they're talking about non-dual awareness, a knowing that is direct, unmediated, by conceptual mind. This direct knowing operates not by acquiring new information, but by recognizing what is already present, yet overlooked, like noticing the transparent nature of a window through which we've been looking without being aware of the window itself. The great perfection refers not to an achievement to be attained, but to the already complete nature of awareness when recognized directly, free from the obscurations that typically veil it. Japanese Zen approaches prajna through the direct pointing to the ordinary mind, Byojoshin, that persists beneath conceptual elaboration. As the 9th century Zen master Huangbo taught, all the Buddhas and all sentient beings are nothing but the one mind, beside which nothing exists. The cultivation of prajna involves not adding something new, but removing the habitual patterns that create the appearance of separation between awareness and its contents, subject and object, self and world. This removal occurs not through force, but through direct recognition of what already is. As contemporary teacher Adyashanti observes, enlightenment is a destructive process. It has nothing to do with becoming better or being happier. Enlightenment is the crumbling away of untruth. It's seeing through the facade of pretense. It's the complete eradication of everything we imagined to be true. What makes prajna particularly challenging to discuss is that it represents not merely a different content of knowledge, but a different way of knowing altogether, one that transcends the very subject-object structure that language presupposes. Traditional texts resort to negation, paradox, and metaphor, precisely because direct description proves impossible within conventional linguistic frameworks based on subject-verb-object relationships, which inherently reinforce the dualistic perception that prajna transcends. Despite these limitations, prajna remains not merely a philosophical concept, but a direct possibility available to consciousness when the obscurations that typically veil it are temporarily suspended. Various contemplative traditions offer systematic approaches to this suspension, from the analytical deconstruction of phenomena in Tibetan traditions to the direct just sitting, shikantaza, of Japanese Soto Zen, from the paradoxical inquiry of koans to the precise investigation of momentary experience in vipassana meditation. What unites these diverse approaches is the recognition that prajna emerges not through accumulating information, but through directly perceiving the nature of mind and phenomena without the distorting filters of conceptual elaboration and habitual identification. This perception reveals not some exotic state separate from ordinary experience, but the true nature of the very experience we're having right now, when recognized directly rather than through the veil of concepts, assumptions, and projections that typically obscure it. The contemporary teacher John Kabat-Zinn expresses this understanding. Mindfulness means paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. This quality of attention, when deepened and stabilized, naturally develops into the transcendent wisdom that Buddhism identifies as prajna, not by adding something new, but by removing the habitual patterns that create the illusion of separation between awareness and its contents. As consciousness transitions towards sleep, consider how this principle of prajna might manifest in your immediate experience. Notice how the ordinary mind, with its categories, judgments, and narratives, naturally begins to quiet as sleep approaches. In the liminal space between waking and dreaming, conceptual boundaries soften, and awareness may occasionally recognize its own nature directly, not as something separate from experience, but as the very knowing in which all experience appears. This natural transition offers a nightly opportunity to glimpse what Buddhist traditions point toward: the direct recognition that consciousness itself, rather than its changing contents, represents our most fundamental nature, neither created when we awake, nor destroyed when we sleep. This knowing presence points toward what various traditions call Buddha nature, Rigpa, or the unborn mind, the ground of awareness that precedes and transcends the conceptual divisions that typically fragment our perception into separate entities. May this ancient wisdom illuminate your understanding, revealing through both waking and dreaming that the profound wisdom traditions call Prajna represents not distant achievement, but the direct recognition of what has always been present, the clear, boundless awareness in which all phenomena arise, exist briefly, and dissolve like waves on the ocean of consciousness itself. The cosmic illusion, Maya. Among the most misunderstood yet profoundly illuminating concepts in Indian philosophy stands Maya, often simplistically translated as illusion, but encompassing a far more sophisticated understanding of how the human mind perceives and interprets reality. Far from suggesting that the world doesn't exist or lacks relevance, a common Western misinterpretation, Maya points to the mysterious creative power that manifests the phenomenal universe while simultaneously veiling its underlying non-dual nature. The Sanskrit term Maya derives from the root ma, meaning to measure, to form, to limit, or to give form. This etymology reveals Maya's essential nature not as falsehood or deception, but as the principle that gives definite shape to the indefinite, that creates boundaries within the boundless, that manifests multiplicity from unity. Maya is thus the creative power that transforms the formless absolute, Brahman, into the formed relative world of name and form, Namarupa, the power through which the infinite appears as finite, the eternal appears as temporal, and the one appears as many. In the Advaita Vedanta tradition, Maya operates as both a revealing and concealing power. It reveals the phenomenal world with its astonishing diversity and complexity, yet simultaneously conceals the non-dual reality, Brahman, that constitutes its essence. Like a projector that creates vivid images on a screen, Maya projects the universe of multiplicity while obscuring the singular consciousness that serves as its substrate. The images are not false, they truly appear, but their apparent separateness and independence from the screen represents a fundamental misperception. The 8th century philosopher Adi Shankaracharya, the most influential systematizer of Advaita philosophy, described Maya as neither real nor unreal, neither identical with Brahman, nor different from it. This paradoxical characterization points to Maya's unique ontological status. It cannot be called real in the absolute sense, because it lacks independent existence apart from Brahman, yet it cannot be dismissed as unreal, because it manifests tangible effects and operates according to discernible patterns. This neither real nor unreal status places Maya in a category that transcends conventional logical categories, what philosophers call non-dual logic. The concept appears throughout Indian philosophical traditions with varying interpretations. In the dualistic Samkhya school, Maya relates to Prakriti, primal nature, as distinguished from Purusha, pure consciousness. In Kashmir Shaivism, Maya represents the divine power, Shakti, through which the supreme consciousness, Shiva, manifests the universe as an expression of its creative freedom, Svatantriya. In Buddhism, particularly Mahayana traditions, Maya-like concepts appear in discussions of conventional versus ultimate truth, the two truths doctrine and in analyses of how the mind constructs its version of reality through conceptual proliferation, prapanka. What unites these diverse interpretations is the recognition that our conventional perception of reality, as composed of separate, independently existing entities interacting in time and space, represents a fundamental misapprehension of a deeper, non-dual reality that transcends these categories. This misapprehension doesn't qualify as mere error, but as a built-in limitation of how mind and perception function at the conventional level. Consider an analogy from modern physics. When we perceive a solid object like a table, we experience it as continuous, stable, and clearly bounded. Yet physics reveals that at the atomic level, the table consists mostly of empty space, with subatomic particles in constant motion, held together by forces extending throughout the universe. At the quantum level, these particles themselves dissolve into probability waves with no fixed location until measured. Is our perception of a solid, separate table therefore false? Not exactly. It represents a pragmatically useful interpretation of reality at the macro level, even as it fundamentally misrepresents what exists at subtler levels. Maya functions similarly, creating the appearance of separate, independent entities, where deeper analysis reveals only interdependent processes with no inherent, unchanging essence. The 14th century text, Vivekachudamani, expresses this understanding. Maya is the power of the Lord. It is that which deludes all beings. Though unreal, it appears real. Though undivided, it appears divided. This creative power manifests the universe not as arbitrary hallucination, but as a coherent expression that follows discernible patterns, what we call natural laws, while concealing its non-dual source. The concept of Maya addresses a perennial philosophical question. If ultimate reality is non-dual, Brahman, how and why does the diverse phenomenal world with its apparent multiplicity arise? Rather than positing a creator separate from creation, which would itself violate non-duality, the concept of Maya explains manifestation as the self-expression of Brahman through its inherent creative power. The universe thus represents neither arbitrary creation nor predetermined necessity, but the free play, lila, of consciousness, exploring its infinite potential through finite forms. The Mundaka Upanishad uses a powerful metaphor to illustrate this relationship. As a spider sends forth and draws in its thread, as herbs grow from the earth, as hair grows from the head and body of a person, so from the imperishable arises this universe. This image suggests that manifestation emerges naturally from Brahman's nature, not as something externally imposed, but as an organic expression of its infinite creative potential. What makes Maya so compelling and challenging to transcend is that it operates not merely as an external force, but through the very structure of human consciousness. Our cognitive apparatus naturally organizes perception into subject-object relationships, categorizes phenomena according to learned patterns, and constructs a narrative of separate selfhood that feels indisputably real. These cognitive processes serve evolutionary purposes and enable effective functioning in the relative world. Yet they simultaneously reinforce the fundamental misapprehension that Maya perpetuates, the perception of separation where only unity exists. The 9th century philosopher Sureshvara, a disciple of Shankara, described this process. Maya has two powers. One is called the veiling power, Avarana Shakti, which conceals the true nature of reality, and the other is the projecting power, Vikshepa Shakti, which projects the illusory world. These complementary functions operate simultaneously. first concealing the non-dual nature of reality, then projecting a dualistic interpretation that we mistake for fundamental reality itself. This understanding carries profound implications for spiritual practice. If Maya operates through the very structure of ordinary consciousness, then liberation, moksha, requires not merely intellectual understanding, but a radical transformation of perception itself. The Bhagavad Gita describes Maya as exceedingly difficult to overcome, adding that only those who take refuge in the divine can pass beyond this divine illusion. This suggests that transcending Maya involves not merely philosophical analysis, but direct realization of our identity with the very consciousness in which Maya appears. The process resembles waking from a dream. During dream states, we experience events and environments that seem utterly real, despite having no independent existence, apart from consciousness itself. Upon awakening, we recognize the dream as a projection of our own mind, not unreal, in the sense of not having occurred as experience, but not possessing the independent reality we attributed to it during the dream state. Similarly, spiritual awakening involves recognizing that what we took to be independently existing realities are actually appearances within consciousness rather than separated from it. This recognition doesn't negate the relative reality of the phenomenal world any more than waking negates the experience of having dreamed. The world continues to operate according to natural laws, and we continue to interact with it effectively by respecting its conventional patterns. The difference lies in how we interpret what we experience, recognizing it as the expression of consciousness rather than as something existing independently from consciousness. As the Ashtavakra Gita expresses, the universe appears in me as a dream appears in consciousness. How could consciousness need liberation? The concept of Maya addresses not only metaphysical questions about reality's nature, but also practical issues of human suffering. Vedantic analysis identifies avidya, ignorance of our true nature, as the root cause of suffering. This ignorance manifests through Maya as the misidentification of the self with limited aspects of experience, typically the body, mind, personal history, and social identity. When we mistake these changing phenomena for our essential nature, we inevitably experience anxiety, insecurity, and suffering as these aspects change, decline, and eventually dissolve. Liberation comes not through escaping the world, but through recognizing its true nature and our relationship to it. As the contemporary teacher Rupert Spira expresses, enlightenment is not the discovery of a new experience. It is the recognition of what is always present. This recognition reveals that while the phenomena appearing through Maya constantly change, the consciousness in which they appear, our true nature according to Vedanta, remains unchanged, unbounded, and complete. This understanding transforms how we relate to experience itself. Events and circumstances lose their absolute quality, appearing more like weather patterns moving through the sky of awareness rather than defining realities that determine our essential nature or worth. Pleasant experiences can be enjoyed without grasping. Difficult experiences can be met with equanimity, recognized as temporary modifications appearing in consciousness rather than threats to what we most essentially are. The 20th century sage Ramana Maharshi compared Maya to the screen in a cinema. The events portrayed on screen may include disasters, conflicts, or tragedies, yet the screen itself remains unchanged by what appears upon it. Similarly, consciousness, our true nature beyond individual identity, remains untouched by the changing phenomena that appear within it. Recognizing this unchanging awareness as our essential nature, rather than identifying exclusively with its changing contents, constitutes the freedom that Vedanta identifies as our natural state. Modern neuroscience and cognitive psychology offer intriguing parallels to the concept of Maya. Studies increasingly demonstrate how perception involves active construction rather than passive reception. The brain doesn't simply record reality, but actively interprets sensory data according to expectations, past experiences, and evolutionary programming. What we experience as objective reality proves to be a sophisticated model, constructed by neural processes, useful for navigating the relative world, but not necessarily representing any absolute or complete picture of what exists. Philosophy of mind encounters similar insights through what philosopher Thomas Metzinger calls the ego tunnel, the compelling but ultimately constructed nature of our experience of selfhood and reality. As he describes it, the conscious self is the content of a model created by our brain, an internal image, but one we cannot recognize as an image. It is a tunnel. This contemporary analysis resonates remarkably with ancient Vedantic understandings of Maya, suggesting that what was once considered mystical insight increasingly appears consistent with scientific understanding of mind and perception. Critics sometimes charge that the concept of Maya promotes disengagement from worldly concerns or ethical responsibilities. Nothing could be further from the authentic teaching. Recognizing the Maya-like nature of conventional reality doesn't diminish appropriate engagement, but transforms its quality, from acting out of ignorance, attachment, and fear, to acting from wisdom, compassion, and freedom. As the Bhagavad Gita demonstrates through Arjuna's story, spiritual understanding doesn't exempt one from action, but enables more effective, harmonious action, aligned with universal, rather than merely personal values. As consciousness transitions towards sleep, consider how this principle of Maya manifests in your direct experience. Notice how the apparently solid, stable reality of waking consciousness naturally dissolves as sleep approaches, how thoughts, perceptions, and the sense of separate selfhood begin to fluctuate and transform. This natural transition offers a nightly reminder of how even our most convincing perceptions depend on particular states of consciousness and can dissolve or transform as consciousness itself shifts. In the liminal space between waking and sleeping, you might glimpse directly what Vedantic teachings point toward. That awareness itself continues even as the contents of awareness change dramatically. This unchanging awareness, neither created when you awake nor destroyed when you sleep, points toward what the Upanishads identify as your true nature, beyond the veiling and projecting power of Maya, the eternal witness that remains constant, while the play of forms continually transforms. May this ancient wisdom illuminate your understanding, revealing through both waking and dreaming that while the phenomenal world operates according to natural laws and demands appropriate engagement, its appearance as separate from the consciousness perceiving it represents the fundamental misapprehension that Vedanta calls Maya, the cosmic creative power that simultaneously manifests and veils the non-dual reality that constitutes both world and self. The infinite self, Brahman and Atman. Among the most profound and revolutionary insights of Indian philosophy stands the recognition of the ultimate identity between Brahman, the boundless absolute reality that underlies and permeates all existence, and Atman, the innermost essence of the individual self. This non-dual understanding forms the cornerstone of Advaita Vedanta philosophy and represents perhaps humanity's most audacious metaphysical claim, that the deepest nature of each individual consciousness is identical with the infinite ground of all being. The Upanishads, ancient philosophical texts forming the conclusion of the Vedas, express this insight through the Mahavakyas, or great sayings that point directly to this ultimate truth. Tat tvam asi, that thou art. Aham brahmasmi, I am Brahman. Prajnanam Brahma, consciousness is Brahman, and I am Atma Brahma, this self is Brahman. These declarations represent not mere theological propositions, but direct pointers to a recognizable reality, that what we most essentially are transcends the boundaries of individual identity to encompass the fundamental nature of existence itself. What makes this claim so revolutionary? Consider how we typically experience ourselves as separate entities with clearly defined boundaries, distinct from others in the world around us. We feel ourselves to be inside our bodies looking out at an external reality. This sense of separation forms the basis of our conventional identity, shaping how we navigate relationships, pursue goals, and understand our place in the universe. The Atman Brahman identity challenges this most basic assumption about our nature, suggesting that our experience of separation, while pragmatically useful for navigating daily life, ultimately misrepresents the deeper reality of what we are. In the Chandogya Upanishad, the sage Uddalaka instructs his son Svetaketu on this truth through a series of analogies. He asks Svetaketu to dissolve salt in water and then try to find it again. When the son reports that the salt has seemingly disappeared, yet the entire water tastes salty, Uddalaka explains, "That which is the subtle essence, in that have all beings their existence. That is the truth. That is the self. And that, Svetaketu, that art thou." The salt, invisibly permeating the water while remaining imperceptible as a separate object, illustrates how Brahman permeates all existence while remaining imperceptible to conventional perception. The philosophy distinguishes between two levels of reality: Vyavaharika, conventional reality, where multiplicity and distinction operate, and Paramarthika, absolute reality, where only Brahman exists without secondness. Our ordinary experience of multiplicity belongs to the conventional level, while the non-dual Brahman represents the absolute ground. This is not to dismiss conventional reality as meaningless, but to recognize its relative rather than absolute nature. Like recognizing that while we experience the sun rising, this perception, though pragmatically useful, doesn't reflect the deeper astronomical reality. Advaita Vedanta uses the term Maya to describe the principle that creates the appearance of multiplicity and separation where only non-dual reality exists. Often mistranslated as illusion, Maya more accurately refers to the mysterious creative power that manifests the relative world of name and form from the undifferentiated absolute. Maya is not opposed to Brahman, but is itself an expression of Brahman's infinite creative potential. Not a mistake to be corrected, but a divine play, Lila, to be recognized for what it is. How might we understand the relationship between infinite Brahman and individual consciousness? The Mandukya Upanishad describes consciousness as having 4 states: waking, Jagrat, dreaming, Svapna, deep sleep, Sushupti, and the transcendent 4th, Turiya, that underlies and pervades the other 3. While we typically identify ourselves with the contents of waking and dreaming consciousness, the text suggests that our deepest nature lies in Turiya, the unchanging awareness that remains present through all changing states, like the screen that remains unaffected by the images projected upon it. The Katha Upanishad offers another striking metaphor. Know the self as the lord of the chariot, the body as the chariot itself. Know the intellect as the charioteer, and the mind as the reins. The senses, they say, are the horses, the objects of sense, the paths. When a man has understanding, when his mind is constantly held firm, then his senses are under control, like the good horses of a charioteer. This imagery distinguishes between the various aspects of our functioning, sense organs, mind, intellect, and the witnessing awareness, Atman, that observes them all without being identical to any particular function. Perhaps the most radical implication of the Atman Brahman identity is that consciousness, your consciousness right now, is not a product or property of the brain, but the fundamental reality from which all manifestation arises. While conventional scientific understanding views consciousness as emerging from material complexity, the Vedantic view inverts this relationship, seeing matter as a manifestation within consciousness, rather than consciousness as a product of matter. As the contemporary teacher Rupert Spira expresses it, consciousness doesn't know about objects. Objects are known by, made of, and appear in consciousness. This perspective challenges our most basic assumptions about reality itself. We typically believe we are conscious beings in a material world, but what if we are consciousness itself, within which the experience of being a particular person in a material world arises? The difference is subtle, but profound, like shifting from believing you are a character in a dream to recognizing you are the dreamer of the dream, containing and transcending all dream characters and scenarios. The metaphor of the dream proves particularly apt. In dreams, we create entire worlds with multiple characters, complex scenarios, and apparent causality, all ultimately happening within our own consciousness. Upon waking, we recognize that the dream events, while seeming to happen to us, were actually projections of our own mind. The Vedantic suggestion is that our waking reality represents a similar projection, not unreal, but not possessing the independent, separate existence we attribute to it, ultimately arising within, and as the infinite consciousness we call Brahman. This understanding does not negate the relative reality of our everyday experience, any more than waking negates the experience of having dreamed. Rather, it contextualizes conventional experience within a more comprehensive understanding, like recognizing that while we experience ourselves as separate bodies, at another level we're composed of atoms that are mostly empty space, vibrating in quantum fields that extend throughout the universe. The Atman Brahman identity represents a similar shift in perspective, but at the level of consciousness rather than materiality. The practical implications of this understanding are profound. If what I truly am is not separate from what you truly are, if we are diverse expressions of the same infinite consciousness, then the boundaries that seem to divide us are more apparent than absolute. This doesn't erase our uniqueness as individuals any more than recognizing that waves are water negates their distinct forms and movements, but it does place that uniqueness within a deeper context of underlying unity, transforming how we understand our relationship with others and the world. The 20th century Indian sage Ramana Maharshi suggested a direct method for realizing this truth through self-inquiry, by persistently investigating the source of the I thought, asking who am I, and tracing awareness back to its source, rather than accepting the conventional answer of name, form, personal history, etc. One can potentially discover the infinite awareness that precedes and transcends individual identity. This investigation doesn't add anything new, but removes the misidentification that obscures our true nature. Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj expressed the essence of this realization. Wisdom is knowing I am nothing. Love is knowing I am everything, and between the two, my life moves. This paradoxical statement points to the recognition that while as a separate entity I am nothing, no particular thing, as consciousness itself I am everything, not separate from the totality. This perspective transforms suffering by revealing that what we truly are remains untouched by the changing circumstances that seem to threaten our conventional identity. The Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, one of the oldest and most revered philosophical texts of India, puts it this way: "You cannot see the seer of sight, you cannot hear the hearer of sound, you cannot think of the thinker of thoughts, you cannot know the knower of knowledge. This is your self, that is within all." This teaching points to the witnessing awareness that makes all experience possible, while itself remaining prior to and distinct from the objects of awareness. The knowing, in which all thoughts, perceptions, and sensations appear. Remarkably, this ancient philosophical insight finds echoes in certain interpretations of quantum physics, where the observer and the observed cannot be absolutely separated, and in the hard problem of consciousness, recognized by contemporary philosophy of mind. The difficulty of explaining how physical processes alone could give rise to subjective experience. The Vedantic perspective suggests that this problem arises from a fundamental misconception about the nature of consciousness and its relationship to the physical world. Does this understanding imply that the material world is unreal or unimportant? Not at all. Just as the ocean doesn't negate its waves, but expresses itself through them, Brahman doesn't negate the relative world, but manifests as it. The Vedantic perspective doesn't reject relative reality, but contextualizes it with an absolute reality. Like recognizing that while we experience ourselves as separate bodies, at another level, we participate in ecological, atomic, and quantum systems that transcend individual boundaries. This perspective transforms how we understand spiritual practice itself. Rather than seeing meditation, self-inquiry, or devotional practices as techniques for acquiring something we lack, they become methods for removing the ignorance, avidya, that obscures what has always been our true nature. As the Ashtavakra Gita expresses, you are really unbound and actionless, self-illuminating and spotless already. The cause of your bondage is that you are still resorting to purification of the mind. The realization of Atman Brahman identity represents not an achievement, but a recognition. Like suddenly realizing you've been wearing glasses you forgot were there. Nothing objectively changes in that moment of recognition, yet everything is perceived differently. Similarly, the realization that consciousness itself, rather than the particular contents of consciousness with which we conventionally identify, constitutes our deepest nature, doesn't change the apparent world, but transforms our relationship with every aspect of experience. Perhaps the most profound implication of this philosophy addresses our deepest existential concerns. If what I truly am is not the limited, vulnerable entity I conventionally take myself to be, but the infinite consciousness in which all experience arises, then my essential nature was never born and cannot die. As the Bhagavad Gita expresses, weapons cannot cleave it, nor fire burn it, water cannot wet it, nor wind dry it away. Unborn, eternal, changeless, ever itself, the self is not slain when the body is slain. This isn't a claim about personal immortality, the continuation of our individual identity beyond physical death, but a more radical recognition that what we most essentially are transcends the very categories of birth and death, existence and non-existence. Just as the ocean remains whether particular waves rise or fall, consciousness itself, our deepest nature according to this philosophy, remains untouched by the temporary forms that arise and dissolve within it. The contemporary teacher Muji expresses this understanding. The recognition of our true nature is not a belief, not a secret, not an achievement, and not even a realization. For who would it be that realizes? It is simply the end of ignorance, the natural revelation of what has always been true, but was overlooked due to conditioning. This encapsulates the essence of the Brahman Atman understanding, not something new to be gained, but the recognition of what has always been the case beneath our conventional misidentification. As consciousness transitions toward sleep, consider the possibility that what you most fundamentally are is not contained within the body, but is the knowing space in which all experience, including the experience of being a particular person with a body, arises and subsides. Notice that as thought slow and sensory awareness dims, something remains aware of this transition. This unchanging awareness, neither born with the body nor limited by its boundaries, points toward what the Upanishads identify as your true nature, the self that is one with the infinite ground of all being. May this ancient wisdom illuminate your understanding, revealing through both waking and dreaming that the consciousness you are is neither bounded nor separate, but an expression of the infinite reality that the Upanishads call Brahman, the knowing presence in which all experience of self and world, time and space, being and becoming, arises, exists, and eventually dissolves back into the boundless awareness that you already, always are. The imperfect beauty, Wabi-Sabi. At the heart of Japanese aesthetics lies a concept so subtle yet profound that it resists direct definition while permeating every aspect of traditional culture. Wabi-Sabi, Chaji, represents not merely an artistic preference, but a comprehensive worldview that finds beauty and meaning precisely where Western aesthetics often overlooks it, in impermanence, imperfection, and incompleteness. This aesthetic philosophical perspective emerges not through abstract theorizing, but through direct perception of the transient, unfinished, and irregular qualities that characterize both natural phenomena and human creations. The compound term unites two distinct yet complementary concepts. Wabi originally connoted the loneliness of living in nature, remote from society, but gradually evolved to express the subtle beauty that emerges from simplicity, understatement, and even apparent lack. Sabi initially referred to withering, aging, or decaying, but developed to indicate the patina that time bestows, the aesthetic dimension of natural aging processes. Together, these terms point toward an aesthetic sensibility that finds profound beauty in the humble, imperfect, and time-worn, rather than in the grand, flawless, and pristine. This perspective stands in striking contrast to classical Western aesthetic traditions that often idealize symmetry, permanence, grandeur, and perfection. Where Greek aesthetics sought ideal forms transcending material limitations, and Renaissance art strove for mathematical precision and perfect proportion, Wabi-Sabi embraces asymmetry, roughness, irregularity, and the marks of time and use. As Leonard Cohen observes in his seminal work on the subject, Wabi-Sabi is the beauty of things imperfect, impermanent, and incomplete. It is the beauty of things modest and humble. It is the beauty of things unconventional. The philosophical foundations of Wabi-Sabi emerge from the integration of three fundamental principles derived from Zen Buddhism: impermanence, mujo, emptiness, or absence of fixed self-nature, ku, and suffering, or unsatisfactoriness, ku. These principles transform aesthetic perception from attachment to fixed ideals toward appreciation of the transient, contingent nature of existence itself. Rather than seeking escape from impermanence through illusions of permanence, Wabi-Sabi finds beauty precisely in the evidence of transiency. Fallen leaves, weathered wood, fading flowers, the patina on well-used tools. This profound acceptance of impermanence appears throughout Japanese cultural practices. The annual cherry blossom, sakura, viewing parties celebrate not merely the flower's beauty, but specifically their ephemeral nature, how their brief, exquisite blooming and swift scattering embody the transience of all phenomena. Similarly, the autumn moon viewing tradition, tsukimi, focuses attention on the temporary alignment of conditions that create moments of natural perfection, precisely because they cannot last. These cultural practices cultivate awareness that beauty emerges, not despite, but through impermanence. The material expression of wabi-sabi aesthetics appears most vividly in traditional Japanese arts, particularly the tea ceremony, chado, and its associated crafts. The tea master, Sen no Rikyu, 1522 to 1591, revolutionized this practice by replacing the ornate Chinese porcelains previously favored with rough, irregular, locally made ceramics that embodied the qualities of imperfection and naturalness. The famous story tells how Rikyu, when asked to tend his master's garden, carefully raked it to perfection, but then shook a cherry tree to scatter a few blossoms randomly across the immaculate surface, creating through this intentional imperfection a deeper beauty than mechanical precision could achieve. The tea ceremony encapsulates wabi-sabi's essence through every element. The deliberately modest tea hut, tsukaya, with its natural materials and asymmetrical design, the carefully selected but often irregular tea bowls bearing the marks of their creation in fire, the arrangement of seasonal flowers in their various stages from bud to withering, even the carefully choreographed movements that remain slightly different with each performance. As tea master Suetsu Yanagi expressed, the tea ceremony is founded upon the adoration of the beautiful among the sordid facts of everyday life. It is essentially a worship of the imperfect, as all art is known to be, opposed as it is to our modern culture's worship of perfection. This appreciation extends beyond aesthetics to ethical and spiritual dimensions. The quality of mind cultivated through wabi-sabi awareness involves not merely artistic sensibility, but humility, non-attachment, an appreciation of subtle beauty easily overlooked by conventional perception. As philosopher Okakura Kakuzo wrote in The Book of Tea, "In the tea room, futility is suggested rather than emphasized. Incompleteness is purposely cultivated in order to give play to the imagination. This intentional incompleteness invites participatory engagement rather than passive consumption. The viewer completes what remains unfinished through their own perceptual involvement." The material manifestations of wabi-sabi aesthetics feature several distinctive characteristics. Asymmetry and irregularity replace perfect balance and uniformity. Natural materials show their inherent textures and variations rather than being disguised by artificial finishes. Objects bear the marks of their making, the potter's fingerprints, the the woodworker's chisel marks, the weaver's occasional inconsistencies. Colors tend toward the subdued and earthy rather than bright or primary hues. Forms often suggest natural processes, erosion, weathering, organic growth, rather than geometric precision. The famous Japanese art of kintsugi, jinji-gi, golden joinery, perhaps most perfectly embodies Wabi-Sabi philosophy by repairing broken pottery with gold or silver lacquer, not disguising the breakage, but highlighting it as part of the object's unique history. Rather than considering the breakage a flaw to be concealed, kintsugi transforms it into a distinctive feature more beautiful than the original unbroken state. This practice represents not mere technique but philosophical statement that imperfection, damage, and repair constitute integral elements of an object's beauty and significance, rather than detractors from some ideal, pristine state. Contemporary architecture and design find renewed relevance in Wabi-Sabi principles amid growing dissatisfaction with sterile perfection and disposable consumer culture. Architect Tadao Ando's concrete structures incorporate natural elements like changing light, water, and carefully placed natural materials to create experiences that evolve with weather and seasons, rather than maintaining unchanging appearance. Designer Naoto Fukasawa creates objects that anticipate and incorporate the effects of use and aging rather than attempting to resist them. These approaches recognize that genuine sustainability requires not merely recyclable materials, but objects designed to become more rather than less beautiful through years of use. The ecological wisdom of Wabi-Sabi emerges through its alignment with natural cycles and processes, rather than opposition to them. Unlike design approaches that attempt to create permanent perfection by resisting change, Wabi-Sabi anticipates and incorporates transformation as essential rather than accidental. Materials are selected not merely for initial appearance, but for how they will age and weather over time. Maintenance involves not restoring original condition, but appropriate stewardship of natural aging processes, like the careful application of oil to wood that deepens its character rather than attempting to maintain its original appearance. The philosophical depth of Wabi-Sabi extends beyond mere appreciation of particular aesthetic qualities to a comprehensive orientation toward existence itself. It suggests that our suffering often emerges not from imperfection, impermanence, and incompleteness themselves, but from resistance to these inherent characteristics of reality. By finding beauty precisely in these qualities, Wabi-Sabi cultivates a non-dualistic relationship with existence, neither idealizing transcendent perfection nor resigning to flawed materiality, but discovering profound meaning in the transient, imperfect nature of embodied experience. This perspective offers profound corrective to contemporary consumerism's emphasis on newness, flawlessness, and constant replacement, against the cycle of acquisition, disappointment, and disposal that characterizes much modern consumption. Wabi-Sabi suggests finding greater satisfaction in fewer objects that develop character through use, rather than deteriorating into obsolescence. As philosopher Suetsu Yanagi observed in The Unknown Craftsman, the fundamental nature of man will not be satisfied with the trivial, perfect, symmetrical. If we do not wish to succumb to mere novelty, a return to an unchanging standard is necessary. The relationship between Wabi-Sabi and Zen Buddhism reveals their shared emphasis on direct perception beyond conceptual categories. Just as Zen meditation, Zazen cultivates awareness that penetrates habitual thought patterns to experience reality directly. Wabi-Sabi aesthetics bypass conventional categorizations of beautiful, ugly, or perfect, flawed, to appreciate phenomena as they actually appear. Both traditions recognize how conceptual filters typically distort perception, how our learned expectations and preferences prevent us from experiencing what actually stands before us in its uniqueness and suchness, tathata. This direct perception emerges through cultivated attention to subtle qualities easily overlooked by conventional awareness. The fading edge of an autumn leaf, the irregular pattern of raindrops on stone, the worn smoothness of a wooden handle shaped by years of use. These subtle phenomena reveal their beauty not to casual glance, but to sustained, receptive attention. As tea master Sen Soshitsu 15 expresses, in the way of tea, we seek to cultivate the ability to see with the heart rather than just with the eyes. The literary expression of wabi-sabi appears most distinctively in haiku poetry, with its focus on transient natural phenomena and the emotions they evoke. The great master Matsuo Basho, 1644 to 1694, exemplifies this sensibility in verses like, "An old, silent pond, a frog jumps into the pond, splash, silence, again." This minimalist form captures not merely observation but the emotional resonance of momentary, imperfect beauty, creating through suggestion and understatement what elaborate description could never achieve. The deliberate incompleteness of haiku invites the reader's participation in completing what remains unstated, embodying the wabi-sabi principle that genuine aesthetic experience emerges through engagement rather than passive consumption. Contemporary psychological research increasingly confirms the wisdom of wabi-sabi's approach to imperfection and impermanence. Studies on resilience suggest that perfectionism often correlates with psychological distress, while acceptance of imperfection associates with greater well-being. Research on mindfulness demonstrates the benefits of present-centered awareness that embraces rather than resists transience. Investigations of aesthetic experience reveal how objects with perfect symmetry often provide immediate but short-lived appeal, while items with subtle irregularities sustain interest and appreciation over time. The ethical dimensions of wabi-sabi extend beyond aesthetic preference to a comprehensive relationship with material culture. Against consumerism's emphasis on novelty, quantity, and disposal, wabi-sabi suggests cultivating fewer, more meaningful relationships with objects that develop character through use, rather than becoming obsolete. This perspective recognizes that genuine sustainability requires not merely recyclable materials, but fundamentally transformed relationships with material culture, moving from ownership toward stewardship, from possession toward appreciation. This stewardship appears in traditional practices like the care for antique tea bowls, which pass through generations not as static museum pieces, but as living objects that continue to develop character through appropriate use and maintenance. The tea masters speak of listening to what an object needs, rather than imposing predetermined maintenance schedules. Developing intimate familiarity with particular items that reveals their unique requirements and capacities. This relationship transcends both negligence and aggressive preservation, finding middle path through attentive care that respects natural aging processes. The social implications of wabi-sabi emerge through its challenge to status-based consumption and display. By finding beauty in humble materials and modest forms, this aesthetic directly contradicts consumption motivated by social competition or status display. As philosopher Okakura Kokuzo observed, it is essentially a worship of the imperfect, as all art is known to be, opposed as it is to our modern culture's worship of perfection. This opposition extends beyond aesthetics to question fundamental assumptions about value, success, and meaning in contemporary consumer societies. The psychological wisdom of Wabi-Sabi lies in its recognition that our relationship with imperfection largely determines our capacity for satisfaction and meaning. When we demand flawlessness from ourselves, others, and our environment, we guarantee perpetual disappointment, as reality never matches these impossible standards. By finding beauty precisely in the imperfect, irregular, and transient, Wabi-Sabi transforms our relationship with the actual conditions of existence, not through resignation, but through discovering previously unrecognized dimensions of meaning and beauty in what actually is, rather than what theoretically might be. This transformed relationship extends from material objects to our own bodies and lives. Against commercial beauty standards that emphasize youthful perfection and treat natural aging as pathology requiring intervention, Wabi-Sabi finds distinctive beauty in the facial lines that record decades of laughter, concern, and experience. Against productivity cultures that demand flawless performance, it values the unique capacities that emerge through embracing, rather than disguising our particular strengths and limitations. Against narratives of life as linear progress toward perfection, it recognizes the distinctive beauty in each phase of the life cycle, including decline. As consciousness transitions toward sleep, consider how Wabi-Sabi might illuminate your immediate experience. Notice how the natural irregularity of breath, the asymmetrical comfort of your resting body, and the incomplete thoughts that drift through awareness as sleep approaches all embody the imperfect beauty this aesthetic celebrates. The transition between wakefulness and sleep itself exemplifies Wabi-Sabi's appreciation of liminal states, neither fully one thing nor another, but revealing distinctive qualities precisely through their transitional, impermanent nature. May this ancient wisdom illuminate your understanding, revealing through both waking and dreaming the profound beauty available, not despite, but through the transient, imperfect, and incomplete nature of existence. In finding aesthetic and philosophical meaning precisely where conventional perception often overlooks it, in simplicity rather than elaboration, in natural aging rather than preserved youth, in humble materials rather than precious substances, Wabi-Sabi offers not mere visual preference but comprehensive orientation toward what philosopher Byung-Chul Han calls the salvation of the beautiful in its authentic, imperfect manifestation.